All right, folks, I'm going to get right into it. Chapter 9. Things are getting heated here in this election season. I cannot believe that I have now 2 elections that I have to worry about, but that's how it is. So, Chapter 9 of Freddy the Politician by Walter R. Brooks. I'm going to get cozy. You get cozy. We are cozy. Let's go. On a warm spring evening 3 days later, Freddy sat in the bank. He had a frown on his face and a pencil in his hand. He wasn't doing anything with the frown, but with the pencil he occasionally jotted something down on a piece of paper. Then he would sigh and, putting down the pencil, pick up a palm leaf fan and fan himself exhaustedly for a few moments. It was hot in the bank, which had a door but no windows. Opposite Freddy's head was a crack between 2 boards which extended all along one wall of the bank. Peeking through it, he could see a group of animals listening to a campaign speech by Jinx, and the sounds of other campaign speeches drifted through the door. The great presidential campaign was in full swing. Freddy got up and walked to the door. "Well, here comes Hank, back from the station," he said after a minute, turning toward Grover and John Quincy, who were talking together in low voices in another corner of the bank. "Well, well, the beans have really gone at last." "You had better come back and sit down," said Grover. "It doesn't look well for an officer of the bank to be loafing in the doorway during business hours." Freddy smiled good-naturedly. "Oh, it's hot in there," he said. "I don't see how you stand it." "There's a nice breeze comes through this crack," said John Quincy. "I'm bigger than you are, and I take a bigger breeze," said Freddy. "It may keep you cool, but I can just barely feel it on the tip of one ear." "Hi, Hank," he shouted. "Did you get him to the train all right?" Hank, pulling an empty buggy behind him, stopped by the wall. "Guess so. Last minute, Mr. Bean remembered he'd forgot his pipe and wanted to go back for it. But Mrs. Bean said they wouldn't let him smoke a pipe in them fancy foreign hotels. So he bought some cigars. Last I seen of 'em, they were all leaning out of the car window and waving to me. And Mr. Bean had that big cigar, and it looks funnier than all get out on him. Makes me kind of sad, though. Well, guess I better get back and get this harness off. It's pretty hot for it." And he went on toward the barn. Freddy went back into the bank. "Mr. Secretary," said Grover, "I wish to notify you that there is to be a meeting of the board this afternoon at 3 to vote for officers." "Officers?" said Freddy. "The bank has got officers. What do you need to vote for them for?" "We have to vote for a secretary," said John Quincy. "But I'm secretary," said Freddy. "Say, what is this? Are you trying to get me out?" "Oh, not at all," said Grover. "But in view of your lack of interest in the affairs of the bank, we feel we should have another secretary, one who will be here during business hours." Freddy would have been glad enough to get out of the bank, which hadn't been very much fun, particularly since the arrival of Grover. But he wasn't going to be thrown out, and he wasn't going to leave all the things the animals had entrusted the bank with, to say nothing of Mr. Bean's money, in the care of strangers. At least he said to himself that he wasn't, but just how he was going to prevent it he didn't know. He remembered Mrs. Wiggins' advice about laughing, however, and so instead of getting mad, he suddenly burst into a loud roar of laughter. He held his sides and laughed, and he was pleased to see that the woodpeckers first looked startled and then rather worried. "What's so funny?" said John Quincy. See here, Freddy. You know you're not a good secretary for the bank. X will be better, and he likes the work. And we're not going to vote you out, you know. You'll still be an officer." Freddy went right on laughing. "Oh, go ahead and laugh, stupid," said Grover, losing his temper. "Let me tell you, my fine young friend—" "Father," interrupted John Quincy warningly, "perhaps Freddy has a Well, perhaps he knows some reason why we shouldn't vote XC in his place. Perhaps we should hear his side of it. My side? Said Freddy. Ha 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 ha. Oh, you'll hear it soon enough. Go ahead and vote me out and see what happens. Boy, it makes me laugh every time I think of it. The woodpeckers looked nervously at each other, and Grover said, Well, what we're doing is being done for the good of the bank. I hope for your own sake that you aren't planning anything foolish to get even with us. Ah, I've got a plan all right, said Freddy. Go ahead and have your old board meeting. If I'm not secretary of the bank anymore, I don't have to stay here anyway. And with a final giggle, he picked up his pencil and paper and left. That laughing is certainly great stuff, he said to himself. Just the same, I wish I did have a plan. But that will have to wait until after the election. He walked up to the pig pen, went into his comfortable, untidy study, sat down in the old easy chair in which he had composed so many of his immortal verses, and studied the paper over which he had been frowning in the bank. The paper was well covered with figures in Freddy's careful handwriting. He had used both sides of the sheet, and from the appearance he had given the proposition more than a little thought. And this is what he had written on it. And what we have here is a table, and it says Farmers Party, under that Wiggins for president. Then there's 2 columns, animals and numbers of votes. So here we go. Cows, 3 votes. Horses, 2. Dogs, 2. Cats, 1. Pigs, 1. Mice, 4. Ducks, 2. Rabbits, 176. Skunks, 11. Bears, 1. Foxes, 1. Squirrels, 34. Chickens, and then in parentheses, doubtful, 38. Owls, 1, question mark. Chipmunks, mixed animals, including field mice, 82. After he had studied it a while, he added it up, and it came out to 346. Then he added it again, and it came out to 365. Freddy wasn't very good at addition. Oh, well, he said, that gives you a rough idea. So then he took another piece of sheet of paper and wrote, Equality Party, Grover for president. Woodpeckers, 7 votes. Rats, 21. Robins, 18. Sparrows, 42. Mixed birds, 135. Weasels and assorted small animals, this is estimated, 65. Then he added these up, and it came out to 287 the first time and 290 the second. And then he took a third sheet of paper and wrote 365 minus 290 equals 74. And I don't know where he got that for. He studied this third paper for a long time, and at last he said to himself, well, even if my figures are not quite right, we can't lose. If Charles and all the chickens vote for Grover, still we still have more votes. Pshaw, Wiggins is getting elected, no problem. I guess I'd better get ready my piece for the Cinderborough newspaper right now. So he blew the dust off his typewriter and wrote, headline, Wiggins wins. Cow elected. First animal republic president. By an overwhelming majority today, the Farmers' Party of the Bean Farms Animal Republic carried their candidate to victory over the suave and courtly Grover, the Equality Party's choice for president. Mrs. Wiggins, after casting her own vote early in the day, remained quietly in her barn listening to the election returns. When the news of her victory was brought to her, she smiled quietly and said, I did it all for... And here Freddy stopped and shook his head. Nope. He said, that's wrong. That's what they say when they run a race or something. Let me see. I'll have to think of something good. The people have spoken, she said with quiet dignity. It only remains for me to... Freddy had to stop again at this point. for the door opened and John stuck his nose in. "Hey, Freddy, are you going to the duel?" "Duel?" said Freddy. "What duel?" "Grover and old Wibbly. Better come along. It ought to be good." "Ugh, there's not going to be any duel," said Freddy. That was all Grover's talk. Sure, it was Grover's talk, but he's got to back it up by fighting. He wasn't going to do anything about it, I guess, but a lot of us kidded him about it, and then this morning Jinx was making a speech down by the creek, and he brought it up and said, did we want a president who talked big and made a lot of threats and then backed down when it came time to fight? And I guess Grover decided he'd lose a lot of votes if he didn't challenge old Wibbly to a duel. So he did. "Gosh," said Freddy, stuffing his papers into a drawer. "Sure, I'm coming. When does it start?" "I don't know." Old Wibbly just laughed when John Quincy brought the challenge and said, well, as long as he was the challenged party, he had a right to select the time and the weapons. And so he said, "Beaks and claws at midnight." John Quincy said, "That isn't fair. Grover can't see at night." And old Wibbly said, "That isn't my fault. We fight then or not at all." So then John Quincy went back and told his father, and Grover got mad. I guess he thought old Wibbly was afraid, and he said he'd go down this noon and force him to fight. So we're all going down to see what happens. From all directions, the animals, their political differences forgotten, were converging toward the woods. The birds, and such animals as could climb, had got seats on branches which had a good view of the entrance to old Wibbly's nest, high up in an old gnarled beech. Everybody stared at the entrance, although the owl wasn't visible, and Grover had not yet come. Freddy stared until he got a crick in his neck, and then he laid down on his back and looked up that way, which actually was much easier. After some time, Grover came flying through the trees, followed by John Quincy and X. Freddy thought he looked very determined, but then woodpeckers have a sort of a determined look anyway, so it was hard to tell. He certainly gave a very determined rap on old Wibbly's door with his bill. "Oh, nothing today," said a voice, and then a young owl came and looked out. She was a niece of old Wibbly's named Vera, who kept house for him. "Oh, excuse me," she said. "I thought it was the junk man." "This is no time for cheap jokes," said Grover. "Tell old Wibbly to come out. I have challenged him to a duel, and he's got to fight." "Oh," said Vera, "you've come about the duel. But aren't you early? Uncle was planning to tear you to pieces about midnight. He's going to have his claws sharpened. Said he didn't want to botch the job. No sense to cause needless suffering. One swift stroke, tear the head right off. That's really the kindest thing in the end. That's what Uncle always says." One or two of the listening animals giggled, and Jinx said, "Wow, is there a doctor in the house?" But Freddy, because he was lying on his back, saw what none of the others saw. Old Wibbly, sitting on a branch just above Grover's head. "You tell your uncle to come out," said Grover. "I'm not going to fight him at midnight. I can't see in the dark as he can, and he knows it." "Oh, you won't need to," said Vera. "Uncle never misses." "If you won't tell him to come out," said Grover angrily, "I'm coming in and pull him out." And he hopped nearer to the entrance. "Oh, are you indeed?" said Vera, and she reached out one capable claw and grabbed him by the neck and shook him. Here we go. There's Vera. The feathers flew, and Grover struggled and pecked at her, and John Quincy and X went for her too. But she was just inside the hole, and they could not reach her. "Hey, go easy, Vera," called Jinx, and the other animals began to get worried, for Grover's head was beginning to waggle. And then old Wibbly said, "That'll do, Vera, that'll do." Every head in the crowd went up, and there was a murmur of surprise. And old Wibbly said, "You've handled this badly, niece. I don't want to kill the creature. Thought I could save myself bother by keeping out of sight. Ugh." He flew down next to Grover, who was saying, "Rah!" and wriggling his neck as if he had a tight collar on. You see, Woodpecker, what chance you'd have in a duel with Vera. And she's not as strong as me, either. Often given her a good spanking when she misbehaved. Isn't that true, niece? That's right, Uncle. Well, so you want a duel, eh? Suppose you'd be satisfied if I'd made an apology? Grover, who couldn't speak, nodded. Said old Wibbly. What is it that I said? I said you were, that's right, a stuffed shirt. Said you talked a lot of balderdash. That's true, too. I won't apologize for telling the truth. See here, Grover, you're smart, no coward either. Why not stop being a stuffed shirt and stop talking balderdash? Then I could say, Grover isn't a stuffed shirt and Grover doesn't talk balderdash, eh? That's really the way to settle this. No insult, no duel. Ugh, I'm making a speech myself. I demand satisfaction, croaked Grover. I will not be made fun of. Oh, you will be made fun of, if you're funny, said the owl. By others, if not by me, and you can't fight every animal on the farm. Well, can't talk all day. All right, I apologize. You apologize? Said Grover. Certainly. You are a stuffed shirt and you do talk balderdash, but I apologize for saying so. But that's no apology, said John Quincy. What do you mean it's no apology, said the owl. Either I apologize or I don't apologize. If I do, it's apology. Isn't it? Yes, but let it go, John Quincy, said Grover. We're not getting anywhere. He doesn't intend to fight. Very well, Wibbly. I accept your apology, but kindly keep away from my meetings in the future. Oh, I certainly shall, said the owl, because I can't stand balderdash. Grover, who had started to leave, turned sharply around, but John Quincy said something to him, and he shrugged his wings, and the 3 woodpeckers flew off. Old Wibbly closed his eyes. The crowd, much disappointed that there had been no fight, gradually melted away. This business will lose Grover some votes, said Freddy to John. Old Wibbly made sort of a monkey out of him. I don't know, said the fox doubtfully. Grover wasn't afraid. It's a good thing to have a president who isn't afraid. How's the election gonna go? It'll be a walkover for Wiggins, said Freddy enthusiastically. Grover hasn't a chance, not even if the chickens all go over to him, and I don't think they will. Charles is mad at us, but Henrietta controls the chicken vote, and she'll be loyal to the old crowd. And if Charles doesn't vote the way she tells him to, there'll be an empty perch in the warm corner of that chicken coop after election. I heard her tell him that, so I know. Well, that's fine, said John. I thought you looked worried, and I wondered. I'm worried about the bank, said Freddy. I'd like your advice. And he told the fox about the board meeting. If I could get into that meeting, he said, I could keep them from putting me out. Officers have to be elected by a unanimous vote. In fact, everything the bank does has to be agreed to by all the officers. Listen, John, do you suppose you could give me digging lessons? Maybe I could dig down to the boardroom. You couldn't dig into it for a week, even if you had steel claws, said the fox. You'll need a tunnel nearly 3 feet across. Excuse me, Freddy, but you're too fat. I know, said Freddy. My whole family are that way. Fleshy. My father was enormous. A fine figure of a pig, you understand, but enormous. We like to eat, of course. Pigs do. I expect that's why they call us pigs. I remember your father, said John. When I was little, he used to come down to the woods for acorns, and we liked him so much. Always a laugh and a joke for everybody. You know, Freddy, it was always my ambition to grow up to be as smooth and sleek and well-rounded as he was. You know, that's funny, said Freddy. I've always wanted to be thin. Always. Sort of slender and willowy. I never saw a pig like that, but I see no reason why one shouldn't be. You know, the first thing I ever wrote had a hero like that. A slim pig. Dear me, what was the title of that? The Trail of the Lonesome Pig? No, that was another one. Come down to my study. I'd like to read it to you. So Freddie forgot all about the board meeting, and he and John spent a happy afternoon reading out loud in the pig pen. And it wasn't until supper time, when John had last gone home, that Freddie remembered. Probably he wouldn't have remembered then if John Quincy hadn't come over to tell him the result of the meeting. We voted you out, and X is in as secretary, said the woodpecker. And then we voted you in again as 16th vice president. So you see, you still have your office, but none of the work to do. 16th vice president, said Freddie. But there aren't any vice presidents. How can I be 16th? Banks always have a lot of vice presidents, John Quincy explained. The more they have, the more important the bank is. We just made you 16th, so it would sound like a more important bank. But what do I have to do? Asked the bewildered pig. Oh, you don't have to do anything. That's just the beauty of it. The vice presidents don't vote even, so you don't have to worry about that. The only thing they have to do is if the president is absent, one of them takes his place. It's really an honorary position, a very highly honorary position, Father says. Too honorary for me, said Freddie, and then he remembered, and instead of saying what he had been going to say, he began to laugh. And John Quincy got mad and left. But he left without finding out what Freddie really thought about the result of the meeting. And that was just what Freddie wanted to do. For Freddie didn't have any thoughts about it at all. What a situation. I'm concerned. See you soon.